When people know I grew up in India, I'm often asked if I ever saw Gandhi. I never did, but those questions made me think about this period in my life and in Indian history that Gandhi was featured quite prominently. Partition and thereabouts. My family was scheduled to go to furlough home to the U.S. in March of 1947. Let me catch my breath.
Sure. Take your time, it's all right.
Momentous events were about to occur at that year in India. It had become obvious to the British they would have to finally pack up and go home. They had made promises to Indian nationalists that if they cooperated in the British war effort in Europe, they would be granted independence. But it wasn't happening soon enough. Even as a 10-year-old, I was aware of Gandhi and the serious demonstrations and reprisals that were occurring. I think most missionaries and other colonists living in India considered Gandhi a nuisance and rabble-rouser, even as they understood the longing of the Indian people for independence. But Gandhi knew how to discomfort the powerful and use the power of numbers to advance his causes. The actual date for the British exodus and the partition of the country had been set for August 15, 1947. The British government sent a lawyer, a man who had never been in India, one Sir Cyril Radcliffe, to delineate where the borders of the two countries should be. It was a complicated situation. The plan was for states or districts with majority Muslim populations be turned over to Pakistan and Hindu majority areas to India. Further complicating the situation was the fact that there were over 500 semi-independent princely states, and France, Portugal, and Oman also had colonies in the existing India. Muslims in British India comprised a sizable minority, but many of them felt that they would never be treated fairly in a Hindu-dominant independent India. There was a strong movement, the Muslim League, headed by an aristocratic, England-educated lawyer named Muhammad Ali Jinnah, which agitated for a separate independent Islamic state. Gandhi was strongly opposed to the partition of India. He argued that Hindus and Muslims had coexisted for centuries and that a divided India would be a weaker India. As Independence Day approached, there were frequent outbursts of Hindu-Sikh-Muslim violence, slaughters in formerly peaceful villages and on trains. It was a very tense time. The violence was not generally directed at foreigners, and local Christians were largely spared. In fact, wearing large red crosses on their shirts, they often served as first responders to help when violent outbreaks occurred. However, I remember one occasion when my father felt he needed to make a tour of mission schools in area villages before going on furlough in March of that year. Several of his experienced teachers accompanied him. They traveled by train, expecting to be gone 3 to 4 days, conducting in-service training. As a matter of course, my dad always took his bicycle along, so once he reached a destination, he would have an independent set of wheels to get around. The 4 days passed, and his teachers arrived back home, reporting that Dad went off on his bike to check out one more school. A couple of days passed, no sign of him. Another couple of days. We at home were, of course, very worried, imagining all sorts of dreadful possibilities. Due to the violence, curfews were in effect all over the country. Train schedules were very erratic. I remember the feeling of dread, but he did, of course, eventually show up, having ridden around the countryside on his trusty bike until he found a train that might bring him home to Sialkot. So we left India in March, and on August 15th, the British pulled down their flag. India was independent, and the new nation, a bifurcated nation, East and West Pakistan, was born, and we missed both the horror and the hoopla. After an 18-month furlough, our family, minus older sister Dorothy and brother Bruce, returned to the Indian subcontinent, but to a new country, Pakistan, born while we were away. UNHCR estimates that 14.5 million people were displaced from their countries of origin. They led by any means they could. Many never made it. Up to 2 million died. The dairy farm next to our compound was now a refugee camp. One very noticeable change was in dearth of trees that used to line every roadway. They were all cut down for firewood by the refugees as they made their tortuous way to an unknown destination. Upon our return, my mother and I were witness to the terror that a Hindu woman doctor who had worked in the mission hospital in our city must have felt as she prepared to flee for her life to India, leaving a couple of metal trunks full of her personal effects, obviously just crammed in, with a sprinkling of tobacco to guard against insect damage. In addition to the man-made political troubles, nature visited the new nation with horrific floods. The international community responded. Church World Service shipped in food, clothing, and building supplies. Our spare bedroom housed bags of wheat, powdered milk, clothing, and other commodities, among which were several inexplicable items. Hundreds of slim wool skirts arrived. Styles had changed. The wartime skinny skirt was out. The new look featuring circular skirts was in. Scores of ladies' hook-and-eye corsets came in, and boxes of paper dress patterns. But local ingenuity flourished. 2 skinny skirts sewn together, one around the torso, another as a yoke and sleeves, and many happy little girls had nice chemises to keep them warm. The corsets turned up, decked out with silver braid, as Roman soldiers' uniforms in biblical dramas. But most satisfying of all, the paper patterns provided us with the best toilet tissue we ever had.